Now, intelligence is a very controversial topic in psychology because it can mean different things for different people. So if I ask you, when you say intelligence, what do you really mean? You can come up with a number of different definitions of it. Some people would consider an intelligent individual someone who does well in school. Someone else might consider an intelligent individual someone who has a lot of money, or someone who retains a lot of knowledge or acquires information very easily. So in general, intelligence can be defined from a purely evolutionary point of view as the underlying ability to understand the world and cope with its challenges. And this is an interesting definition because what happens with intelligence is that you can be intelligent in one environment, right, in one part of the world, but you move to a completely different part of the world and you are now very dumb. You don't know how to survive there. So you have to be able to understand the world around you, cope with its challenges, and therefore it increases the probability of survival, increases the probability of reproduction, and you'll be more likely to pass on those genes that made you intelligent to the next generation. In our culture, in our society, intelligence provides a basis for academic achievement. So it is believed that if you're intelligent, you do well in school. Some researcher tries to understand intelligence more by studying the factors that make up intelligence. So what are the components of intelligence? And there are a number of different theories. So I will start with the first one, that Spearman's view of intelligence, that suggests that intelligence is simply composed of two factors, G factors and the S factor. G factor is general intelligence. The S factor is specific. So if you have a lot of G, according to Spearman, you'll be intelligent in many different fields. And that's why Spearman, that is, believed that we have this general intelligence that we can apply in many different situations. Oftentimes you'll find someone that is intelligent and is intelligent in many different ways. Many things that they do well. On the other hand, though, Spearman also realized that some individuals have very unique specific intelligences, so very unique specific abilities. So someone might be very gifted to, in a particular field, like for example, extremely good dancer, but then everything else that they do very poorly, right? So that individual will have a very strong S factor, or specific intelligence factor, for what could be called kinesthetic ability, right? The ability to move your body in space. So there's a differentiation between this general aspect of intelligence and specific. Turnstone suggests that we have 9 specific factors or primary mental abilities. This is another theory, the Sternberg theory, which is a triarchic theory of intelligence. Sternberg believed that we have analytical, creative, and practical ability. So analytical ability is more related to academic performance. Creative ability related to the fantasy, as the name suggests, the creative ability to invent. And practical ability is more like street smart. Let me show you this different slide where you can see that this view of intelligence is interactive, where you have these 3 components that interact with one another. So you have the analytic intelligence, they interact with the practical intelligence, interact with the creative. So all 3 influence each other. You have a low practical intelligence, your overall intelligence will be relatively low, no matter if you have a great analytic and creative ability, because you will never be able to to use, to apply, or to do what you know. Right? So according to this view, having a balanced type of intelligence where you have some ability to analyze, compare, evaluate, some ability to create, to invent, and to design, and also to use, to apply, and to do, all together, right, gives rise to a greater intelligence. But of course, you can have some individual who are better at creative but not that good at practical. Someone who's extremely good at analytic, the analytic aspect, but they can not create at all. So you can certainly observe in a population the different prevalence of either one aspect of a triarchy theory or another. The first individual that systematically studied intelligence were Binet and Simon, these two French researchers who developed the first way to test children for their mental ability. What they did is that they devised a set of questions that they would ask children to answer, and they then were able to develop these norms for the type of question that children of different age groups should be able to answer. So they had a number of questions that the average 7-year-old should be able to answer, because that's what they found when they developed these norms. So they found that the vast majority of 7-year-olds could answer those questions, so therefore those questions should be the one that the 7-year-old should be able to answer. Then they found more questions, of course, that the 8-year-old should be able to answer, even more questions that the 9-year-old should be able to answer. When they had all that information, they could then go out in the field and test children by exposing them to these questions. And let's say they found a 7-year-old that in fact could answer the question that the average 7-year-old was able to answer when they developed the norms. Then they were able to say that that particular child was average. They were 7. They could answer the question as a 7-year-old could answer. Sometimes, on the other hand, they found that the 7-year-old was able to answer questions that the average 8-year-old was able to answer. So, of course, in that case, the individual was above average. They were 7. They were able to answer the question for 8-year-old. And also, if you have the other probability where you have a 7-year-old who might only be able to answer the question that the average 6-year-old can answer. And in that case, that child will be classified as being below average. So, Binet, in particular, moved to the United States, went to Stanford University, and developed what for many, many years was the standard test of intelligence, which is still called to this day the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scale, or SBIS. And it was adapted for intelligence quotient, which is IQ. So Binet developed this formula where he found that IQ, right, intelligence quotient, is equal the mental age, which is basically the type of question that the child can answer. If you can answer the question that the average 7-year-old can answer, your mental age is 7. You're reasoning as a 7-year-old. If you can answer the question that the average 10-year-old can answer, then your mental age will be 10. Chronological age is their actual age, right? The actual age of a child times 100. So someone who can answer the question that the average 10-year-old can answer, and they're 10 years of age times 100, their IQ will be 100. If they're 10 years old but can answer the question that the average 12-year-old can answer, if you follow the formula, 12 over 10 times 100, that's 120. Right? So the IQ will be 120. And if your mental age is less than your chronological age, then your IQ will be below 100. So the average IQ is 100, above 100 is above average, below 100 is below average. Today we use, for the most part, these new scales, not the Stanford Binet anymore, but the Wechsler scales. They contain separate subscales that include verbal performance and a number of other performance tasks, which are, for example, memory is part of them, visual ability, and so on. And these new scales, including the Wechsler scales, use what are known as deviation IQ, so that your score is compared to the score of the average individuals in your own age group. Because this formula that I showed you before works well, but only for children. Once you reach a certain age, what happens is that your chronological age, your actual age, keeps on going up. However, your mental age at one point, typically in the early 20s, stop growing, right? Or at least it doesn't grow as much. Right? So if you compare a 20-year-old to a 40-year-old, if you double the denominator of this fraction, what will happen is that the 40-year-old would end up having half of the IQ of a 20-year-old given the same mental age. So that wouldn't be correct, right? So that's why today we are using more deviation IQ, which is based on a normal curve. So this is the normal curve, right? The bell-shaped curve. You might have heard it before. And you're able to then detect that the vast majority of the population here in purple score between 90 and 110, so in that span. So as you go on the extreme, right, on the extreme high and extreme low of intelligence, you have less and less people. So you have only about 4% or so of the population that score 130 and above, and about 4% or so of the population that score below 70, which is classified as intellectually deficient. Now, one of the questions relating to intelligence is whether or not intelligence contains cultural bias. What happens is that the upper class in typically our culture appear to score higher on intelligence scales than any other group. And that is because the questions that people develop for these tests are applicable, are worth it, they're true, they're valuable only for the dominant middle class culture. So individuals that are outside of that middle class culture might not be exposed to the type of questions that are asked in intelligence scales and therefore suffer from it. A number of individuals have tried to develop what they call culture-free tests in order to get rid of this bias. You don't want some individuals to be at a disadvantage when you're measuring their mental ability. So Cattell, for example, developed this what they call the culture fair intelligence test, as I'm going to show you in a moment here, is based simply on logic. Right? So if you have this sequence, what should come next, and you have to choose one of these, and the answer is of course 1 for this one, and these are matrices similar, right? So you have this combination of shapes. See, it doesn't have anything to do with any common knowledge. Let's say, what is, the relationship between a guitar and a piano, for example. It doesn't have anything to do with that. Rather, it's pretty abstract. And again, it would be 1. Turns out, though, that unfortunately, even using this culture fair intelligence test, European American children outperform African American children, and the reasons are unclear, and it possibly have to do with some cultural beliefs, some ideas about testing in general that might affect one culture more than another. And finally, we have this topic of whether intelligence is more due to nature or nurture. Some people believe that intelligence is highly inheritable, that you inherit your intelligence from your parents. Some people believe that we learn intelligence, that whatever we are exposed to is really determining intelligence. So for example, if we are exposed to a more challenging environment, we're supposed to study more, then we'll become more intelligent. And of course, when you're comparing these two, nature and nurture, the genes versus the environment, what you want to do is to compare the similarity in IQ scores between individuals that are more or less similar in terms of their genes and more or less similar in terms of where they grew up. So as you can see, the greatest correlation, the greatest similarity in IQ scores is with identical twins reared together. Right? Obviously, identical twins have the same DNA, same genetic makeup, and they are also reared together. We grow up in the same environment. So you have the same genes, they have the same environment, have the greatest probability. So they are almost identical, closer to 0.9 correlation in IQ. So if you know the intelligence of one of these identical twins that grow up together, you're pretty certain that the second twin is going to have a very similar IQ. Down the line comes a little bit less than that, is identical twins reared apart. So same genes but different environment. Fraternal twins reared together. Right? So what are fraternal? What's the difference between identical and fraternal twins? Fraternal twins are not identical in their DNA. They're like siblings. They're like a brother and sister. They don't have any of course they're 50% similar in their DNA, but they're not identical. Brother and sister, 50%. They share 50% of their genes, and in fact, as you can see, they're the same as siblings reared together. So there's fraternal twins and siblings share the same DNA, and if they share the same environment, there's not gonna be any difference. Now, and you can go down the line. Of course, you see the cousins are at the very bottom. Now, from this graph, you can actually argue for both, that the genes are important and that the environment is important. For example, you might say, well, look at this. Compare this first line of identical twins reared together with the second identical twins reared apart. Right? They're identical twins, they're the same, right? Identical, and yet if they're reared apart, they're not as similar. So this difference here is caused by the environment, right? Because the environment of them growing up together make them more similar than if they're not. So it has to be a contribution to intelligence, the environment that is. But you could also use the other argument. Let's say, well, let's keep the environment. Let's now give some importance to the environment, and we can argue what if we compare identical twins reared together, right? So it's the same DNA, the same environment, to fraternal twins reared together, right? So the same environment, but now you have a different DNA. As you can see, if you change the DNA, keep the environment the same, similarity in IQ decreases, right, between this blue and the green. Right? So that means that supports the idea that the genes play a role, right? Because if you're only 50% similar to your twin as opposed to 100% similar to your twin, even though you share the same environment, the similarity in IQ is less. So this is due to the genes. Anyway, so as you probably, hopefully, have appreciated, at the end, IQ is caused by both the genes and the environment.